Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Johnny Fisher has moved to 10-0 and claimed the Southern Area title, the first hardware of his career, stopping Harry Armstrong in the 7th round of their fight at the O2 on the Joshua Helenius undercard. And let me tell you, this fight had a little bit of everything, from a dramatic first minute of the fight to Harry Armstrong starting to come into the fight to Fisher ending it in spectacular fashion. So this one here, literally, when you hear the definition caught cold, you saw that in the first punch of the fight. Johnny Fisher lands a jab on Harry Armstrong, and he stiffens, he backs up, and Fisher senses the hurt and literally tries to jump on him and end the fight. And he did drop him. He uncorked a number of big right hands and left hooks, just absolutely let the kitchen sink go, puts him down, and continues to follow up for the next 30 seconds or so. So the first minute of the fight, absolutely frenetic. But Harry Armstrong sees it off. He's able to cover up and do enough to get out of the round. But not only that, by the end of the first round, he was the one starting to push forward, trying to exert himself on Fisher. And actually, the next couple of rounds, we saw Harry Armstrong building into the fight. Second round was pretty competitive, a good comeback round by Armstrong after what happened in the first. And the third, I actually gave to Armstrong, who was coming forward. He was landing shots to body and head with the jab, and also ripping in body shots in the odd right hand. And I think after that sort of initial effort in the first round, Fisher just needed to regroup and he didn't gas himself out, but obviously it was a lot of effort, and we started to see him build more back into the fight in terms of his output as the fight wore on. And by the 6th round, you had Harry Armstrong, who was starting to fade. And Fisher had actively, from rounds 4 and 5, started to work to the body more. So his man, Harry Armstrong, had softened him up a bit. And round 6, he barely threw any punches. He was still pushing forward and pushing Fisher back. But Fisher was the one that was landing the more eye-catching shots. So it'd been a good test for the unbeaten Fisher, who's still pretty raw, and Harry Armstrong, was expected to go a few rounds and hopefully give him a bit of a chin check. So I think all the boxes were checked. And what you had in the 7th round was Fisher. He just started to, go for those big looping right hands, and he catches Armstrong, follows up, eventually gets him on the ropes, and Armstrong is down, and he continues to let his hands go. And the referee is jumping in as the corner for Armstrong, Don Charles, is throwing in the towel. So Johnny Fisher, it was a good learning fight. 10-0, takes the Southern Area title, which he expressed how proud he was of that achievement after the fight. He gave credit to Harry Armstrong. And overall, this is the sort of fight that he needs, especially at this level. So far, apart from Gabriel Nguema, it's largely been, pretty so-so sort of opponents. Not many guys have tested him. This was kind of that right balance of someone who wasn't going to fall down, but they were going to throw back. And Fisher, after the brute strength strategy of that first round, he had to fall back on his boxing. He had to actually use his ring craft to slowly, break down Harry Armstrong, which he did, over the course of those 7 rounds. But there were a few things, obviously, some of the technical elements, and the commentators, noted this after falling over and, getting caught a bit too clean too often. But also one of the things that I was a little surprised about was Fisher just defaulting to, being on the back foot. Whenever he pressed forward, threw his jab and was the one that was the aggressor, he seemed to have more success, as we saw, obviously, in that first round and then ultimately the 7th. So he did seem sometimes to default back to, I'll just jump on the back foot, sit on the ropes. So I think, maybe against better opponents who are as aggressive or big punches, that's a tactic you might employ. But against the light punching comparatively, Harry Armstrong, he needed to be the one that was the boss, because he was allowing Armstrong, in especially rounds 2, 3, and a bit of 4, to kind of dictate the pace and the action and, how the fight was playing out. It was being fought to Armstrong's sort of the rhythm in those rounds. But when he really did start to sink in the body shots, and I think one of the other things as well that could have been a bit more active, and especially we saw at the first punch of the fight, was the jab. Because obviously the right hand started to look a little bit sort of telegraphed, and it was a little too predictable at times. But ultimately, though, Fisher, he has a good test. He's a developing fighter. I think we've seen he is getting better, but he does need more seasoning. And actually, Tony Bellew after the fight said he doesn't think he's ready for the English title just yet, and that the guys at that level hit harder and they will be better overall. And he thought that Fisher should have a few more fights at this level. And I don't necessarily disagree, because I think there's no real rush. I mean, Fisher is obviously a work in project. He needs rounds, he needs seasoning. The guys like Harry Armstrong, perfect sort of opponent. He was able to get the best of both worlds, where he was able ultimately to stop a guy, but he had to use his boxing, his ring craft, and we saw that, his engine is decent. He didn't sort of, as we saw a few weeks ago, Matty Harris against Konstantin Dobyshenko. Harris gassed out and was taken out. Fisher never really looked in any real trouble. Sure, he can tighten up on a few things, and obviously, that sort of stuff be worked on in the gym. But I think we saw he's got a pretty decent engine. And sometimes, while he did need a breather, ultimately he did get a second wind, and he finished the fight in style. What do you make of this, and where do you see Fisher going next? Who next? What sort of level of opponent should he be facing? I mean, I think someone like Franklin Ignatius is that right sort of style of opponent. What about a Hosea Stewart? Those guys, I think, are at or about the same sort of level. So we'll see. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.